So, namaste and welcome to Satsang. So today, excuse me, today I wanted to begin to read from Reality Check, which is only a very thin book, but it's about as direct as I get in my teaching. So at some point, as you're listening to this today, there's probably going to arise the feeling that I don't understand what's being said, or I really cannot live like this. It's too high, too far away from where I am to live as is being described here. And so as you're listening to this today, I'd like to just remind you to listen from the place where there's a huge difference between listening to this and knowing that you're never going to understand or get to where this is describing, and listening from an open place of what would it be like to live as that. You know, it's only describing what reality is already. It's only describing what you are. You are reality already. So it cannot be impossible for you to realize this and live as this. And the purpose of this book is really to challenge all the assumptions that you may have about yourself and the world. So it's going to at some point push a button where you just go, well, I can't really accept that that's true. And nothing in this book or anything that I say in general, or any teacher, is asking you to just believe. It's really pointing out what you may still think is true so that you can question and come to experience it directly. Only if we can realize that we're believing something is true, there's an assumption inside us, are we going to be able to then to question it and to have an openness to see if it's actually true. And most of our assumptions are unconscious that we have about the world and ourselves and how reality is. So it may push some buttons, but that's a good thing. So let's get started with it. Don't listen to this as your ego that's trying to wake up. Listen as the self with an openness to just understand what's being said. If it's not understood while we're actually talking, then just put that out there. Okay, what's it like to know this and to live from this place? And it has to happen because you are already reality. So I'm probably going to spend a couple of weeks reading this. I think because it's a shorter book, we can read it all the way through. With this wonderful lockdown that's going on, we've got some extra time, hopefully. So right from the start, it is straight in at the deep end in this book. So chapter 1 is introduction. So I'm going to read some, and then I may stop and explain some things that have been said, and then afterwards I'll take some questions based on this book or in general what's going on within you. Chapter 1, Introduction. You are the formless reality in which the universe is simply an appearance and is not an actual thing. There are no actual things. Everything that appears to be tangible and solid is really only so because we are perceiving it through our human senses. What is real is the formless, intangible self that is everywhere at all times. You are not a human being, and you're not the formless cause of all forms. So there is no manifestation of this world, things, objects, and people. It is all the one self. So in this introduction, I'm going to state exactly how reality is, and then we're going to spend the rest of the book on doing the assumptions that are getting in the way of you directly experiencing that. What reality is may seem very complicated and very lofty, but it's actually very, very simple. It's the simplest state of all. That's where we have to undo these assumptions. Many spiritual students struggle with trying to understand how the manifest and unmanifest can be really the same thing, and spend a lot of wasted energy trying to resolve this. This book will help you come to understand reality as it really is. Some of the ideas in this book will seem impossible to understand at first, but with repetition, they'll begin to make sense. To perceive reality directly is to understand what you really are and what everything is. So it's worthwhile really pursuing this understanding, because not only will you come to understand what you are, but also what everything is in the world, and everything that's ever been created. So it's not knowledge about something, it's going to help you understand everything. Once you really understand what you are, then nothing will be confusing anymore, and you'll be able to read the statements above and they will seem obvious and true. You'll wonder how you ever thought that you were a separate and limited human being, destined to be born, to live, and to die. How can you come to know that you are present everywhere and at all times? How can you come to know beyond a doubt that you are infinite and unlimited? How can you shed the thoughts and assumptions that the mind uses to keep you feeling bound? We'll take a journey of realizations, insights, and understandings in this book that can help you undo the assumptions that are stopping you and your eternal joy. With each chapter, we will undo more and more of the assumptions of the mind, and it will become clearer and clearer what you actually are. If you don't understand something written in the upcoming chapters, know that you have infinite help around you. Even if you're sat alone reading this and don't know of anyone else that is like you or interested in truth, simply the wish to understand it must bring that understanding to you. And you can always reread each chapter until it makes sense. The truth of your being and the truth of what reality is are the same thing. You are reality. You are everywhere at all times. Time and space exist only as an idea inside you. It's time to break free from all limitations and begin to live as your infinite self. Mind is hypnotic and alluring for a limited time only. The fact that you are reading this means it's losing its hold over you. There is a whole reality beyond the mind, and that is already what you are. Read this book in its entirety a few times. We learn by repetition, and we only accept that as true, what seems to be obvious and familiar to it. So it's up to each one of us to read and question what you read consistently, and consistently question enough to make your own direct knowledge and experience. If there is any gap between what you have seen to be true and what you are living as, then there must be a belief in the way. Simply to recognize, I don't understand what has been written, but I would like to know it beyond doubt, will bring that to you. Ask that question and go and have a cup of tea and watch the understanding present itself. Always rely on your own experience of what is written here. Do not be content with my words. Become this book and live as this book, and you'll never know suffering again. So, chapter 2, discovering that you are formless. This chapter will help you to discover what you really are, and it will begin to undo some of the main assumptions in our thinking process that keep us from seeing clearly. We will use the time-old process of self-inquiry to begin to understand what we are. Self-inquiry is simply when we actually look at what we are, rather than thinking about it. It is where we directly experience what we actually are, which is important because our mind cannot get in the way of this process. So if we're using our thoughts to try to think about what we are, the mind can put in all of its assumptions, and it can start to color what we experience and help keep us feeling limited and stuck. But if we're looking and seeing, which doesn't mean getting rid of those thoughts, but just not referencing them as important for this seeing, then you're going to directly experience what's already true, and there is a difference between those. Otherwise, we'll experience what we think is true for us in a very powerful and literal way. If you sit here and think, I am the unlimited reality that is infinite and all-pervading, then it will not help you unless you actually directly come to know that beyond just thinking about it, only by directly experiencing what you really are will you begin to see clearly. If we merely think about this, then our assumptions about ourselves will alter what we perceive. And if you can accept that all of us have been living in a virtual reality, and what we've been experiencing that we've been calling reality is really what we think about reality. If our go-to place for defining our existence and our experience is our mind and what we think about things, then we're never going to be able to actually directly experience reality, because a mind thinks in terms of duality, and reality is not that. Whatever we believe to be true about ourselves, the world and life, we'll directly experience it as if it's very real indeed. Most of us believe that we are separate human beings, born and due to live for a certain number of years before we die, and this is what we experience as real. The actuality of our existence is very different, and though we must come to know it without relying on thoughts. There is nothing wrong with thoughts at all. Many processes and issues in our daily life require logical thought process. But to awaken fully to the reality of what you are, we need to put thought aside for a while. Each thought we believe will begin to color our experience of the truth, just as sure as wearing colored spectacles will color the world that we see with our eyes. When we consider that most thoughts we believe to be true are totally under our conscious radar, and we don't know what they are, then we can get into some very unreliable experiences of what truth is. It's necessary to always and only use your direct experience to verify what is true. We must be able to experience it and prove it inside ourselves for it to be true. And then we can be certain that it's true. Anything else is just adding to the mountain of thoughts that flies through most people's heads and will not help us. Do not need to stop thoughts or eliminate the mind. In fact, to try to do so will not help at all. We simply need to discern what answers we are willing to take as valid in our self-inquiry. So even if thoughts are there, we can say, thank you very much, mind, and only accept a direct experience instead. Self-inquiry is as simple as asking, what am I really? And seeing what answer we find. We will always find thought answers, and of course, there is nothing wrong with these. Mind will have many things to say about what we are. What we can experience, though, directly is something very different to what you may have expected. What will you find from your self-inquiry? Nothing. You will experience nothing at all, and this is the perfect answer. When we self-inquire and ask what we really are, we may experience a vast space that seems to be empty, void, and with no substance at all, and it can seem unsettling or strange to us at first, perhaps even a little frightening. If we keep looking at that vastness, we'll begin to get used to it. This vast nothingness is what we really are, but not at all what we thought we were. So it may take some time and some adjusting. This vast nothingness is not a thing at all, and is most certainly not the someone that we expected to find from our self-inquiry. It's formless and shapeless, and yet is very much present. Remember, we are only going to take our direct experience that we can know is true. Also remember that we are only just finding out now what we have always been. No matter how long we may have believed, assumed, and therefore experienced ourselves as a separate and limited human being, it has never been so. Now you are coming to see what you have always been. Ask the question again and see what you find. You'll find the same thing and the same every single time you ask. It's just you, and you're formless and everywhere. If you stay in that direct experience and ask some questions of yourself based on the nothingness, you may be surprised at what you find. Are you tangible or intangible? Are you over here or over there? Do you have any shape or color? Where exactly are you? Are you changing or growing or becoming here as this vastness? What time is it there in the vastness? How far do you reach and where do you end? Do you end at all? When did this vastness that you are appear, and when will it disappear? Were you born as this? When did you start? Is there you and another person here? Where do you stop and the next person next to you start? These questions are all going to seem very strange at first, but the more you get used to this vastness, the more clear this will become. And if you're struggling to perceive that vastness, then on my YouTube channel, there's a playlist called Meditations and Guided Self-Inquiry. The guided self-inquiry will take you into a direct experience of this vastness. So these questions may seem difficult to answer at first, but if you'll continue to ask them, you'll soon find that you begin to make some breakthroughs. As you go about your daily life, you may notice that everything seems different now, that you've seen what you really are. Our whole lives as human beings are based on the assumption that we are a separate person, as someone who is moving around in time and space and living out a life for 70, 80, or 90 years before we leave this planet. It can be quite a shock to realize that that is not so. Before we have fully understood what it means to be formless, it may seem that life out there feels pointless and insignificant. You may find yourself wondering, what use is all this world then? What use is my existence? What's the reason for my existence if I'm not what I thought I was? If such a feeling arises, you can know that it's only a temporary phase of adjustment. And once you fully realize what you are, you will know the answer to all of these questions. As human beings, we're taught to value the familiar, the known, and the safe thoughts. And when we suddenly find that what we have known to be true is challenged completely, you can feel insecure for a time. It can help to realize that what we thought we knew about ourselves was never actually true, but we've been fooled into thinking so. So you're only coming to see now how it's always been. It is safest to work from a direct experience of what you can prove inside yourself, rather than base your life on assumptions that have never been questioned up until now. Take some time to consider the questions listed in this chapter. Try to find an answer, but don't worry if you can't answer them. The answers will reveal themselves as you progress into these next chapters. Your understanding of what you are, of what reality is, will deepen as you continue to read. To continue and progress to the deeper stages of enlightenment, we must be willing to realize that what we have called our life has been based on assumptions that are not true. We've based our whole existence on the idea that I am a so-and-so, a human being, living in the world with family, friends, relationships, a job, and an endpoint. For some people, it'll take a while to come to terms with the fact that none of that has been true. You were never limited, lost, or separate from anything or anyone. Some people that read this will immediately be unable to tolerate any lies within themselves about their origin and the nature of their existence, and they'll be driven by an urge to find out the whole truth and live as and from that truth. Others that will read this will face too much resistance from their old and familiar ways of thinking about themselves and so may stop reading this, or lose the book somehow, or get distracted until a much later time. Any of these options is fine, for once the truth has been revealed to you, it's only a matter of time before the want arises in you fully to comprehend what you are and what this world is. This desire will become stronger until it seems to be the only thing that matters. So those kind of chapters are kind of a basic introduction. And the upcoming chapters will go into what it means to be formless and what assumptions that's going to have to cause you to challenge about yourself. And mind is going to suggest this is a scary process because everything that we've known to be true is going to be called into question. And if you listen to your mind, you're going to find a great deal of resistance to doing this. But every awakened being that has done this, questioned everything, has found it more and more beautiful each time they question even the things that everybody else in humanity takes for granted. This world is real and solid and is different to the formless reality that I am. It is the most basic assumption of all. The world is outside of me and different. So what will it cost you to question these assumptions? And is it worth it? Well, I can only tell you from my own experience, which is what I always try to do, that it is just the most amazing thing that can ever happen in any human being's life. And how could we ever really enjoy our life without fear, with that idea inside of us still that we're going to come to an end? Wouldn't it be worthwhile being willing to question and see if that's true? And then be able to live the rest of our existence in this body and every other body from a place of without fear. So I really encourage you to not listen to your mind when it says it's going to be scary and it's going to cost you a lot to do this, or that something will change, because you're only looking at what you already are without the assumptions of mind, without those coloured spectacles on. Chapter 3. What does it mean to be formless? Most people that use self-inquiry do so to a certain point and then stop after a basic level of realization of what they are. To fully understand what it means to be formless and to live as that is going to require you to challenge every assumption or thought that you believe. It need not take a long time, nor need it be difficult of you if you're already willing to change the way you perceive the world, yourself, and other beings. The aim of this book is to help you challenge every thought and assumption that is currently holding you in a limited perception of reality. You'll have to be honest with yourself. And when an assumption pops up and you feel resistance to looking at it, you'll have to notice. You'll also have to be honest with yourself if you find that you're becoming distracted from this most vital work and realizing what you truly are in its fullness. Right now in the world, there are thousands upon thousands of spiritual seekers who believe they know the full truth of what they are because they have seen what you have seen in the previous chapters. People will often say something like, I've seen what I really am, but I still have to live in the world. Or how do I live as this formlessness, but still pay my bills and go to work? Many times I hear people who say they believe they have fully realized the truth of what they are, but they still deeply believe in an out there that is different to the reality of the formless self. I remember going through this stage myself. I thought that seeing the formlessness was enough, and that that I had to somehow understand how to bring what I'd seen out into my world, allow it to pervade my world. It never once occurred to me till later on that that may be an impossible thing to do, because out here is already that formless reality. It just does not look like it. So if you find this is still the case for you, then realization is not yet complete. True knowing of what the formlessness is that you are is of all reality. There is no world or manifest or reflection external to the unmanifest awareness that you are. The full realization of the absolute reality should and must permeate all of your life too, until it does, it's not yet complete. What we call the outer world, the universe of solid objects, is not how we think it is at all. No form, no body, no object is really there as we think it is. And until this has been deeply assimilated, you'll continue to experience lack, limitation, and suffering. I will say again because it contradicts so many of our cherished assumptions. The world is not different to or separate from the self. The manifest did not ever arise out of the unmanifest. There is no difference between form and formless. You are not a spiritual being having a human experience. There is no being or human. The world only appears to be real until you see what it is and what you really are. So those may seem like lofty statements, but again, if you're not listening to mind so much and it says that that's difficult to understand, how can it be difficult to understand this if it is already what you are? All that has to happen is a willingness to question, what is it like if that is actually true? If that is actually true, if those statements are actually so, then let me prove it within myself. Let me be able to prove it within myself. These statements may seem amazing and untrue right now, but I would urge you to remain open as we begin to break down the assumptions that make it seem as though you are living in a solid, tangible world, inside a solid human body that is moving around in time and space. You'll be able to take what you read and see if it's true when you apply it. Only then will you see that nothing is the way you thought it was. There is just the one, and that one is you. You are everywhere at all times, and you are not somewhere. Ideas like somewhere and everywhere don't apply to you if you are formless. Let's stop and check in right now. Take a moment to directly experience the answer to the question, what really am I? Or where am I? And if you notice when you actually experience your true self, you will find you are not a thing or a form. You can recognize that you are very much here, but where are you actually? You know, if you're not a tangible thing, you can say where your body is. You can say where the chair is that you're sat on. You can see where the screen is that you're watching this through. But where are you exactly if you're not a thing? Only things have shapes, boundaries, and locations. Bodies have locations in time and space. It's here or it's over there. But where are you as the formless reality? Can you even say where you are and where you are not? Do you have any boundaries? It's important to rely only on what you can prove to be true and not to go back to thinking about what you are. Notice that your human body and thoughts seem to appear in this vastness that you are. But is that really what's happening? Is there a you plus your body? In the next few chapters, I will challenge these assumptions and you can prove it to yourself. It's not, you can prove to yourself it's not so and come to see that there is no body or mind, no thoughts, and nothing other than you. So nothing else outside of you or inside of you is the ultimate realization. It will only be possible to understand these chapters if you are willing to question what you have come to believe as true. It seems very real and logical to most people that they have a human body and they have thoughts, so much so that they would probably never even think to question this. You are reading this book to find out what reality actually is, and so to do that you must be willing to question what you may not have questioned before and to look at things in a different way. The following statements are true. And if you let go of all assumptions, you'll be able to experience them as true. Don't worry right now if they don't feel real to you as yet. We will work through the assumptions that get in the way of knowing. I would urge you to read the following statements that are true and notice any resistance to any particular ones. If you find some statements to be difficult to understand, or you understand them logically but cannot seem to live as that yet, make a note of it. Realizing one of these statements to be true will make it easier to understand all of them. So the statements are: being formless means that you are effortlessly here. Being formless means that you are immortal. Being formless means that there is nothing other than you, different to or separate from you. Being formless means you never, ever end or begin. Being formless means you are unlimited and always have been. Being formless means you cannot die and were never born. Being formless means you can appear as form and shapes and objects. Form is not different to formlessness. Being formless means you know everything because everything is you. Being formless means you are infinite. You can never run out of anything, be lacking in anything, or want or need anything. So if your experience of life or reality is different to this, then there are still thoughts and assumptions getting in the way of your perception of reality. So all of us start off from that place. And all of us would read something like this and go, that's just crazy talk. You know, I know I did when I first began to question these. I remember hearing Ramana say, Brahman alone is real, the self, and the world is unreal. And I would look outside and go, you know, that's just, how is that possible? You know, if I walk into this table that's sat over here, it feels extremely real, you know, when I hit it with my leg. And then he said, and the world is Brahman. So it took me a long time to come to understand that last statement completely. And that is the essence of what's written here in this book, to try and shortcut that process. We'll look at these statements again, and explanations will be given later in the book, once we have broken down the assumptions that get in the way of them. For now, it's enough to know that the highest level of enlightenment is where we live from and as these statements. It's also the simplest. Reality is already how it is. Nothing is going to change in understanding. And what you read in this book will help you understand, but you will simply be finally able to see how it's always been. The world will still appear to be there. Your body will still continue to function and do what it needs to do. Everything will remain exactly as it is, but you'll be able to see clearly. And I've put that because for myself, when I thought about transcending the idea that the world was real, and living from that place where only formlessness is real, it brought up this huge fear inside me that I was going to somehow drop the body or leave my existence, that nothing out here would have any meaning anymore. And I have dependence, you know, that I can't do that, I can't get to that place. And I just wanted to say that's exactly the opposite of what mind says it's going to be. Everything then is experienced with an intimacy, a wonderful aliveness. Knowing what everything is, then there's no need to be scared of anything at all. And knowing what everything is, because it's you, then there's a sense of love that begins to pervade everything. Not the kind of, I don't know the word, the sense of love that can arise as we begin to, you know, that we love everyone as they are, as their person. You know, this idea that we can love everything as we think they are. But the love for everything is a love for yourself. It's the same thing. The rest of this book will simply be different ways to say the same thing. And so I'd suggest reading it all at least once, and then picking whichever one fascinates you the most, and to deeply investigate it. Each chapter will help to repeat the fact that form and formless are the same thing, but will approach it from a different angle to help bring the conscious awareness to the assumptions that are stopping you from seeing fully. So I'm just going to read one more chapter, and we'll open it up for questions. So these chapters get pretty full on, going into proving that form and formless are the same, and breaking down the assumptions. So again, just to listen with an open curiosity, what would it be like to understand this and live this already? Instead of making it your work to have to come to understand through mind, it's just, what is it like if I'm already this? It must be true. Let me see if it's true, and I'll open up for this revelation to come from inside. Rather than trying to, reading this book as an ego is like trying to climb up a vertical mountain with no equipment and no foothold and nothing to hold on to at all. At some point, you're going to fall off. Instead, I'd invite you to realize you're already standing at the top with me, and there's something inside you that already understands what's in this book, and what every teacher is saying, every true teaching is saying, is already inside your own heart. And there's a monumental difference between allowing that to come forth from within or trying to understand it with your mind. The first one is effortless and simple, and it'll be a beautiful unfolding. The second one doesn't work so well, and maybe you've all experienced that already. Have to keep saying that, because mind will say that there's no way you can understand this book, what she's talking about, as we move into these next chapters. When it says that, don't listen to it. It doesn't know what you are. Chapter 4. There are no forms or objects. Here is a basic error or assumption in our thinking process. Forms or things are real, and they are different to and separate from the formlessness. Here is the fact of what is actually true. There are no objects. There has been no manifestation. A manifestation, or the world, or all this out here, is just an illusion of vibration. Tangible and solid is only real in relation to the human senses. Most human beings would easily and automatically feel that they are sat in a room that has a certain number of items in it, and that they are reading this book. Only few would question if the room was actually appearing inside them. And even fewer people would question which one of these viewpoints is more real, and ask, am I in the room, or is the room in me? Occasionally, it occurs to someone that those two viewpoints are the same thing, one thing, that they are two different perspectives of the one reality. The aim of this book is to help you get to that final realization, and to do so, we have to begin to destroy the concepts that objects are real. Firstly, if we look at what real means, real in our spiritual search cannot just simply mean visible with our eyes. It cannot. If you take the simplest thing of all that we all value on the spiritual pathway, truth, love, and devotion, all of that is invisible to your senses, and yet it's completely experienced as true. Right now, if you ask the question, what am I? If I don't count my body, my mind, and my emotions, then there is just this space that is you, which is invisible. When you're looking through your human senses, then everything that was invisible looks visible for a time. The empty space is vibrating on a frequency that still looks invisible. So our definition of what is real cannot just be limited really to what is visible and perceivable. It has to be stretched a little bit here. To what is real must be eternal and always available, dependable, and not subject to destruction or to an end. So there aren't any objects at all. The things you think are there are not there in the way that you thought they were. They only appear to be there, and they really are not solid. For something to be real, it must be eternal. We'll look at two examples of tangible objects and begin to break down the idea that they are real. Example 1, a wooden table. Let's say you have a wood table in your house. It's safe to say that nearly all of humanity would agree that you have a wooden table which is solid and has dimensions, color, shape, and a lifespan, or a duration of its existence. The world would think anyone who said the table does not exist is a little bit crazy. To begin to grasp, so we're all a little bit crazy on this to even consider. A little bit of insanity is good. So to begin to grasp the fact that there are no objects or forms, we must be willing to think in different ways. When we look at the shape we see in front of us with our eyes, we call it a table. And we believe it is solid and separate to all the other objects in the room, but is it really? If we took a powerful enough microscope and used it to examine the table, we would see that it's not so solid at all. First, we would see atoms vibrating, and then we could magnify even more. We would see subatomic particles moving, appearing and disappearing right in front of our eyes. So if the atoms and the particles that make up this table are actually coming and going right in front of us, how real is this table? If we could increase the power of the microscope even more, we would see that underneath the smallest particles of all was nothing at all, easier to realize and say. We would eventually come back to the formless and intangible emptiness that is the origin of the table. Whatever solid object we put under the microscope would also eventually be seen to be this emptiness, this formless awareness. This is the same formless awareness that you experience when you self-inquire, what really am I? It's the same thing that is the essence of the table. Everything that you could put underneath such scrutiny, even your body, especially your own body, it comes down to cells, tissues, and then atoms, molecules, and then subatomic particles. If we go even further, eventually we come back to nothing at all. Nothing at all. But that space, that formless reality in which all things appear to be here. Whatever arises out of this awareness must be the awareness. So that's a simple sentence to say, but to realize it is going to bring you peace. So whatever arises out of this intangible awareness that you are must be the same as it. It cannot be different. If you've only got one thing to make a universe out of, that which is nothing, the substrate, the formless reality of all of this, how can all of this be actually different to it? And why then do we think it is? It's really because we're looking through our egoic perspective, which is looking at opposites. Ego says that intangible is the opposite of tangible. Visible is the opposite of invisible. But really, these two options need to be transcended with the question, how can I prove that they are the same thing? That's going to lead to a very powerful atomic explosion inside that will just make you so happy that you don't stop smiling for the rest of your life and beyond. So I'll say it again, whatever arises out of this awareness must be this awareness, even if it looks like something completely different to the awareness. When we all start, where we all start is the one formlessness, as we proved with our self-inquiry. How then can we suddenly have two things, form and formlessness? Only thing you can prove in your experience is the formless reality. You cannot prove that there are any objects there, and the proof that we accept that there are objects there is from an object such as our body and the senses that come with it. So the whole proof of our objective reality is based on an object itself. So it's like putting somebody on the witness stand in court that committed the crime and asking them to tell us if they did it or not. It's not so reliable. With the body and senses, nothing wrong with the body and the senses in the world. But when you have a body and you use your senses, it's always going to appear real, just as it does right now to me. And as I said before, if I walk into that wooden table that isn't solid, it feels solid because my leg is vibrating at a similar rate to the wood atoms in that table. Okay. How can we have the awareness and a table? We cannot. It can only be that the table is actually the awareness, but looks like it isn't. What we have called table is really some wood, which is usually some atoms, which is really a vibration, which is really the formless cell. The table only seems to be real and solid because we have thought about it. We may have sat around it to eat, and we may have many memories and general thoughts about what we think the table is. We may remember birthday parties, romantic dinners, or chats over a cup of tea happening at that table, and so we keep the table alive in our own thoughts. So does the table exist out there as a solid lump of wood? No. It does not, because it is the awareness in disguise. Does the table exist in here, in our thoughts, memories, and dreams about it? No, it does not, because those thoughts cease to be when we are in deep sleep, deep meditation, or unconscious for any reason at all. The table vanishes when we do, we as a person, as an ego. When we are not here to think about the table, it isn't here either. So why does it appear so real to us then? Why is the world so insistent that the table is real and solid? It's because the atoms in it are vibrating at a similar speed to our limbs, our hands, our eyes, and our senses. Because the table is appearing in our visual spectrum, it's vibrating at the same frequency as our visual spectrum. We say it's visible. Because it's vibrating in a similar frequency to our human body, we say it's tangible or solid, and then we give it this quality of being real. If an atom is vibrating at slightly higher level, we call it liquid. An even higher vibration, we call it gas. And if something is vibrating an even higher, it becomes out of the range of our senses, such as a dog whistle or the water vapor in the air. For example, if something vibrates too high for our optic nerves to pick up, we call it invisible, which really means not visible to us. Infrared and ultraviolet light have been proven to exist, but they are also out of the range of our optic vibration, and we say that they are invisible to the human eye. We can also see this in the sense of hearing too, as we know there are sounds and pitches that the human ear cannot pick up, such as a dog whistle. We call these inaudible. But if we were to use a camera or voice recorder to record a specific period of time and then played it back, we would also hear noises and sounds that we could not pick up using our ears alone. Human beings all agree that what is tangible and visible to us is real. We believe that what we can see, feel, hear, and touch and smell is real, and what we cannot use our senses to experience is unreal. We are programmed to ignore the intangible. Consider when the last time was that you noticed the space in the room that you're sitting in, or at all, before the objects you think are in it. Even if you're able to notice a space in a room, consider if you feel on some level that it is less real or less important than the objects in the room. Most of us feel sure that the space in the room is different to the objects in it. To see reality as it actually is, then we must begin to challenge our familiar ways of thinking. Just because they are very familiar and everyone agrees with them does not mean that they have ever been true. Reality is the formless awareness, and it is not vibrating in the ultimate state. Vibration arises from the still awareness, and so even vibration must be the awareness too. So I will leave it there for today. We're about halfway through the book. And if you feel like your head's spinning, I just need to remind you that you don't need to struggle to understand anything that's been said. Being already that reality, all you need to do is to allow that intention to go forth that you'd like to come to live as this. And the major struggle you're going to have is to realize it is that simple to understand. It's not scary at all to realize the highest truth. It's beautiful and it's amazing, and it is every human being's birthright. Okay. So I've got a question here I want to read out first, but if you would like to ask a question, if you're still awake after all that reading, if you want to raise your hand electronically, as I can't see you all, if you wave your mouse around on the screen at the bottom, there is participants, and if you scroll down to the bottom, then there's an option to raise your hand, and it'll show me that you're waiting to ask. Okay, I'll come to you afterwards, Vash. I was going to read this question that was emailed in first. So this is an extract from an email because there's a longer section to it. Some of it was personal, so I've taken that out. So, and I feel that this is taking me hopefully into my next stage of being the seeker. Really, like you, I'd like it now, and the urge is getting stronger. So it's the same urge we were talking about in that book, that I have to know this. At some point that urge is going to come forth within everyone. I've had enough of living in a limited perspective of myself and the world. So if there had to be a question right now, it would be, how can I truly come to live as that? So that's an intelligent question, isn't it? That's a really intelligent question. How can I come to live as it? Okay, I'm accepting on principle that I am that, because all these great teachers keep telling me from the history, the great sages of old. And every teacher that's teaching today is saying the same thing. So the question would be not how to become that, but how do I live as that truly? So I would recommend a twofold approach to that. First is to experience what you are over and over and over again. And as I said before, if you need some help with that, then check out the guided self-inquiries and meditations that are on the YouTube channel under their own particular playlist, and experience it, because then it's your truth, it's your reality, it's your you've proved it within yourself in that moment. It can never ever again be something that you're just reading about. And then to question, in what ways am I living as my old self? You know, so what I'm experiencing I am is very different to what I thought I was. And what am I doing? What am I believing that's causing me to keep going back into this idea of being someone that's trying to wake up or trying to break through these assumptions? So they're both really the same thing. Keep seeing and being what you are, and the other side of that coin is to investigate what you are not. Is this problem that I've always taken to be mine true for me? If I'm already the self, if I'm already the one, is this true for me? If I'm already formless, then is any problem that's based on me being a form, a someone, is that really still valid? And really deeply investigating that. And they'll be happening side by side. You'll have a seeing, oh my gosh, I'm formless and I don't think I can find an edge. And then the very next thing will be presented to you is some idea of yourself from the old perspective. And life is saying, okay, now look at this old way of looking at yourself and see if it's still going to be valid for you. Are you still going to agree that you've got this issue, having seen what you are on this side? So it's a simple process, but it has to be done consistently. See what you are, be what you are, and question when it seems that you're being what you're not, your old way. So whenever ego arises, there's just a question, is this true for me now? You know, am I unworthy? Is it taking too long? Is it difficult to wake up? All of those things that ego says about the process itself. If you don't believe those so completely or at all, do you still have an issue that needs to be worked through? So hopefully that is helpful there. Okay. So Bash, if you'd like to ask your question, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
You can, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, the essence of your talk seems to be that form is not different to formlessness, and that assumptions, beliefs, and thoughts are the only thing that actually get in the way of realizing that. But how do we become aware of these assumptions, beliefs, and thoughts, particularly if they're unconscious? Or do they just dissolve naturally as you marinate in the space? Because what I kind of am hearing somehow, if I can articulate it, the essential question is how can I come to live as the space? And the answer essentially seems to be to marinate in the space.
Yeah,
Right?
a faster question would be, why am I so sure I'm not living as that? That's
Right, yeah.
a question that's going to open up and show you these assumptions.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, form is what you said. Is form is not different to formlessness, and assumptions, beliefs, and thoughts are getting in the way. So how do we dig these out? And what if they're sort of unconscious?
They will be, most of them will be unconscious at this point, because there'll be deep-seated ideas that every human being takes for granted.
Right.
So
Yeah.
to dig those out is simply to ask, what assumptions am I still believing about myself, the world, reality? And they will be shown to you. And even if they're not shown to you directly, I mean, you might never have the thought that says, oh, I still think the world is real. But you might experience this to and fro from this deep and profound, more and more constant experience of being the formless one, and then coming out of meditation, having to go to work and seemingly thrown back into a world, where I have to do the food shopping and all of that. And there'd be a sense of difference between the two. How I was before and how I'm having to be now is different. There'll be a sense of two. So to question, is that true? That the world I'm suddenly seen to be thrown back into when I open my eyes is different to the reality that I've seen myself to be, is going to allow that unfolding from inside.
Yeah, because it seems to me where I am now is that I realise that I am this space, this formlessness. And it is a question of digging out these assumptions, beliefs, and thoughts. And I think I've gone past the stage of, because even when I go to and fro, it doesn't panic me, it doesn't frighten me. Whereas I think in the beginning, it was quite terrifying because I experienced it as a collapse of all those egoic structures, all those beliefs, all the ground that you're standing on. But it doesn't really frighten me anymore. But I'm still getting pulled into separation. And I don't.
So
I mean, I can sometimes experience that form is not different from formlessness, but it doesn't. It's not sticking. It's not. But form is not different to formlessness. I understand. There's form. There's formlessness, and that's where I seem to be stuck.
So if you then take up a new question, what's it like to live from the place where they are one? It's not your job to bring those two worlds together. That's what ego's trying to do. It's trying to take two things that it sees them as opposite, form and formless, and it's trying to melt them into one somehow. And the best that ego can do is to keep sort of vacillating between one and the other.
Yeah.
So to
Yeah.
step out of that and to say, is that actually my job? If I'm already the one, then you'll stop disturbing yourself by trying to do a job that you can't do.
Yeah, I think essentially what you seem to be saying is the question doesn't exist, and more than that, that the question itself, the attempt to do it, is actually reinforcing this
Yeah.
separation between form and formlessness. That's
And that is the last place. That's why we study ego, to see how it perceives. It perceives in opposites and pairs. And the
yeah,
one is just one. So the ego cannot perceive the one. You know, it looks at form
no,
and it
no,
says this is very solid and very different to the air, the space that this body's appearing
yeah,
in. So it cannot ever perceive reality, which is no fault of its own. But you don't have to keep on trying to use ego to perceive reality. It's never going to work, is it? So instead, let me see from my real self already, and let's see what happens then. And then epiphanies and understandings will come forth from inside, that actually they are, all of this is the same. Forms are empty and emptiness is form, and that'll be a lived experience. All we need to do to realize that is to stop trying to use ego to understand it, because it cannot. It's limited. It has to stop there, ego. It seems that there's opposites, and ego can never resolve form and formless being the same, because it's trying to take two things and put them into one, and it's never going to work because they're already one thing viewed from two different angles. But it can't understand that through thought. You know, ego is a thought mechanism.
yeah. Because it feels like to me, it feels like jumping off a cliff and then panicking about hitting the bottom, but there's no bottom.
No.
You never actually hit the bottom. You're just falling.
And
All
there never was a cliff either, so
no.
there's nothing to be no jump either. You know, which when I realized that, I started laughing quite a lot. From ego's perspective, it looks like I've got to jump off this basic assumption into the cliff, and then I've got to go into the unknown. What I know is true. Ego says what I know is true, that form and formless are different.
So
But if
what?
it's never been so, then there's no
Yeah.
cliff and no jumping.
No, nothing
And
happens.
then
Yeah. Right. But it seems to me you're using these questions to facilitate a natural process that would happen anyway if you marinated in the space.
it will happen anyway. For me, it took a very painful long time. And I realized that a question, if I'm waiting for something to happen, for some realization to appear, then I'm believing in time and space again. And the more direct way is to ask, what's it like to be myself with a capital S? What's it like to be the one already? That's going to immediately take you outside of time and into a very direct experience of what you actually are. Or it will show you where you're still assuming something to be true that's in the way. You know, that kind of question is going to bring up the assumptions that are left to examine.
But it seems to me that I keep getting pulled back essentially out of habit. These like grooves, and it's just a habit, which is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Because even now, when I get caught up in all of it, I still know this is not it, but I still do it.
Just
And
set aside the mechanism that uses two, you know. That's if you set aside the mechanism that uses two, it'll be over instantaneously. That perceives two, it can never see the one.
yeah, I know what you mean, but then if I when that happens and I do that, and then I try to grab that or direct that, you lost it again.
If your experience is still alternating between self and ego, then you still believe that there's two, and you cannot solve that. You have to instead come from the question, what's it like to already be the one? and abandon all
Yeah.
efforts to get, if you're trying to get rid of something out of your experience, your old way of perceiving,
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
keep this one 100% of the time, then
It
you're
just,
agreeing in your energy that there's two. You're agreeing that there's two states. One is wanted and one is not wanted, and that's the basis of ego. This
yeah.
one should
I'm not,
go,
yeah.
and this
I'm
one
not
should
sure.
stay.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I've certainly done that in the past. I think now I'm just kind of aware that this noise comes now and again. It's just, and I just see it as noise.
So what if the noise is the same as the formlessness it's appearing in? That's a better question. How can I know anything that appears in the formlessness is the same? I'd just advise you to take that question and just live with that for a few days.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much for sharing. It's
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Vidya? Yep. Just ask you to mute yourself again, Bash, if you don't mind. Thanks.
Namaste, Helen.
Hi.
Hey. There was the experience today, and it's the both sides. And for a moment, we were driving, just for the sake of the story, to Savitre's job, and the story came up that I said, I'll go to the shop, I'll drop you off and go to the shop. And just was quiet. And then something said, what are you scared of? What are you running away from? And I immediately asked the question, is that true? Can I run away from anything? Can I be scared of people? And just left it at that. And so that was one perception of the ego's reality. And we got to the lady's place, and immediately she come and said hello, and oh, I want to show you something today. She was really excited, and I just smiled, almost laughed at reality is as it is right now. And it was so intimate and beautiful. I just experiencing being so present and light and not even afraid, nothing. It was completely, and that's what I would have done if I believed in that other reality. Never asked the question. But what was beautiful is to recognize this happened all on its own. So the story was the old egoic remnants of that old self. And it used to do that, run to the shops or away from people. But there was something that just arose. The questioning wasn't thought, nothing. It was just all played out on its own. And later just really being, or going into that deep recognizing itself. None of it existed. None of it was real. Like I'm telling the story now at a memory, but it was very hard to find, even question, did that really happen? Did that, and you can't find it from that deep place of just that pure seeing. You can't honestly say, yes, that was real, that happened, but there's some sort of appearance of telling the story. But in truth, did that really happen from that place of, yeah.
It's wonderful. And it can be that easy, and you'll find that more and more spontaneously that inquiry will just happen. Like something will be suggested, and then there's just suddenly, I know, is that true? Whereas before we'd have been sort of going off it, and so more and more there's just this natural questioning process, or more and more permanently experienced state of openness to actually experience what's true is starting to replace more and more this assumption that this thing that's suggested is true. So mind will offer something, ego will suggest something, and something just naturally is reverting to the openness that we had before, that is the natural state, where we can't automatically agree with anything, good or bad. It's just, let me see if that's true. And in that openness, it's a very, very different experience, isn't it? It's at first it appears sort of intermittently. We might go back into some assumptions temporarily and then come back, have another experience. But more and more, something inside is just falling in love with how it feels to be open, and to be in discovery of what we are, what all of this is, rather than living from our mental assumptions about things. And that is happening by itself, as you so rightly said. It's happening by itself because it just feels so good to experience reality directly, that it begins to gather speed then, doesn't it, and pace. Like, I just don't want to live through my assumptions anymore about anything. Even the ones that I would have thought were scary to question suddenly become like, well, what, is that true too? And everything gets thrown on this big heap of thoughts I'm willing to question. Whereas before our ego was throwing thoughts on one by one on the bonfire, everything, like, chuck it all on there. And it's a very different experience then.
So that's why the natural state, why all that sort of played out, is because the natural state wanted to experience itself so beautiful and intimate and unafraid of anything.
Yeah.
So it's really seeing the natural state is always what it wants. It's seeing what it's probably not doing anything, but that undoing of that false belief. Yeah.
More and more, yourself, the self, it just doesn't want to dream anymore. More and more, it just wants to experience directly, and less experiencing its projections, which is fine. It's absolutely fine. But when it's ready to come out of that, it's such a wonderful expansion, isn't it? An opening. It's not at all like our mind said it was going to be, scary and a big, huge sacrifice, and the cliff that we were talking about, the jumping off. It's actually, wow, it just feels so good to be in the unknown. And the known was never true anyway, so might as well really be myself anyway, where there isn't any fear, as you said.
Yeah. So this played out basically instantaneously. And before that, say a day before, there were thoughts about going somewhere and okay, if this happens, ask the question, and almost convinced what had happened in the past was going to play out again. So just that, because obviously I recognise there's no future other than now. So even I was asking the questions now for say 2 days' time, and today was another opportunity that nothing came up. There was not even none of it. It was just directly experienced as beautiful and open, for the apparent other, the reflection. Obviously, I was still in that beautiful natural state for it to play out beautifully in this other situation. So everything I had imagined that was going to be the same as before and questioned it, it's almost like that's already undone, because that never eventuated to me.
Yeah. And you really come to see that I've got a choice in every moment to live what I think is going to happen, and if I'm remembering what happened before, then I'm going to have some very similar experience now. If instead I come to this moment with no stories at all, even if stories are there, I'm just not going to let them dictate my experience. And then it's a very different experience then, isn't it? You can see these things only happen so many times to me over and over again, because I've approached this situation or this person or this event with this idea, I know how this is going to go. When I see this person, they always make me feel that way, or I always end up saying this thing. So we've literally lived that out again and again, you know, and then stepping out of that is just so wonderful. So what's it actually, what is this person actually like without my projections? You know, what am I actually like without my own projections about myself? What is everything like without my projections? And it becomes a simple thing, doesn't it?
And going there today, there was no even projections, there was no even past story, nothing. I'd forgotten all of that. I'd forgotten that 2 days ago I you know, wanted to undo or question, you know, is that true? It never even arose in the mind today. It just turned up and it was completely fresh and new and beautiful and amazing.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Concept.
And that will just spread into the rest of your life, you know, where you're still experiencing from projection. You'll notice it just don't really want to, it feels too tight now, it's too small for me. It's not wrong, it just doesn't fit anymore. You know, what's it like to go for my entire existence from the open discovery? And it's, you know, that becomes just so wonderful. And the self is just done dreaming when it's done dreaming, you know, imagining a virtual world. Fantastic, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. That's lovely. Okay. So we will leave it there for today. I will see some of you tomorrow night for the course, and Satsang is at 7 p.m. UK time on Thursday. And we will continue reading from Reality Check next week. So, okay. Thank you very much. Namaste.